What if I had to ask, where will you sleep tonight? What if you had no home and nobody knew? What if you thought, others thought that you had a home since your kids were in school, but you thought to yourself, a motel is not a home? What if the God of the universe gets it, but the church of God is slow to understand? Let's read the passage again from Matthew chapter 8 and verse 18. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. And then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens, and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." You see, Jesus was tired. Matthew chapter 8, as we think about our text, we're coming out of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5 and 6 and 7, and that was a long day, but then the service got longer, not the service as in the worship service, but the service of others. And from the Sermon on the Mount to the healing of the leper, to the healing of the centurion's servant, to the healing of many diseases and infirmities, and Jesus stops by and heals Peter's mother-in-law, and she waited on Jesus and the disciples, and yet when evening came, many more came to him from all over to be healed. And so he tells his disciples it's time to get away and get to the other side of the lake for a little relaxation, a little R&R. And when a man says to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go," and you see the text in Jesus' reply, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." A very cryptic text, a very descriptive text, and one that in a lot of ways has become immortalized in our memories. In the next scene, Jesus is asleep on the boat. He finds a place to lay his head. On the other hand, a small fishing boat out on a large lake, I suppose, proves his point. He has no place to lay his head, at least no permanent place. And the man says, "I will follow you wherever you go." And so Jesus' awareness of his own needs and the flippancy with which they thought they could follow this man, failing to fully count the costs of what it means to be a follower, failing to see the commitment to be a follower, is the main idea, surely, of the passage. However, I want to remind you that Peter's mother-in-law had a house, and Mary and Martha and Lazarus had a home, and Jesus had parties at some houses, and Jesus wanted to go to Zacchaeus' house, and Jesus' mother had a home, but where did Jesus live? Nowhere, everywhere. Now, he had a temporary home in Capernaum, but now he is on the road, and he is in the countryside, and he is in the streets, and he is down the lanes, and he is wherever God's people are in need. And God in the flesh was basically homeless apart from the hospitality of others. He has no place to rest his head until it rests at last, lifeless, on the cross. Now, have you ever stopped to consider that you are a follower and that we are worshiping this morning a man who was, in a sense, a homeless person voluntarily? What does it mean to follow a homeless teacher? I'll tell you one thing that I believe it means. I believe it means that he understands homelessness. It means he knows what it's like to be homeless. And so the question that I invite this morning is, do we? Do you? Here's the transition. While foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, there are more than 1,000 people on any given night in this city that share the plight of Jesus. They are homeless. And as Mother Teresa reminds us about Matthew 25, a little later in the Gospel of Matthew, and we'll get there, but it seems to be that there's this sort of crescendo as we go through 8, 9, and 10, and through the Gospel of Matthew leading up to Matthew 25. As she said to me when I was in India and saw her face to face, yes, I saw the lepers, but I also went to her home for the destitute and dying, and as she pointed her little crooked finger right at me, she said, "Whatever you do to the least of these, you do it unto me." And so I want us to remind us again this morning of the plight, what it is like to be homeless. The first point I'd like to make is that the fastest growing of the segment of homeless population in this country is families with children. About 2/5 or 41% of the homeless population is made up of families, making family homelessness a growing phenomenon. 34% of the total homeless population is under 24. And how might that cause us to reconsider our own perceptions of homelessness. The National Alliance to End Homelessness found that more people experience a temporary period without housing as opposed to chronic homelessness. And again, I hope that these facts might be familiar to some of us, but to some of us, I suspect not so much, that they might challenge us to rethink our view of the homeless. A 2012 survey by the U.S. Conference of Mayors found that 30% of homeless adults were mentally ill, 18% physically disabled, 50% or so alcoholics or addicts, 16% victims of domestic violence, 13% veterans. Put up the next slide there. 1 in 5 homeless young adults become victims of human trafficking. Here's another fact. Many homeless people have jobs, but their income is not enough. In other words, and sometimes it's maybe they don't have a job, but they have a spouse that has a job. Okay, but in that family unit, they're working, but the work is not adequate. The income is not adequate to prevent them from being homeless. Here's a point that I derived from this, and it's common in the literature, and it's not really a surprise, but I want to share it this morning, that homelessness is complex. Whether it's bad credit, whether it's having been incarcerated and getting out and not knowing how to then make the migration into society, whether it's drug or mental illness, all of these things, even getting cleaned up, makes it difficult to get a job once one is on the street. So as a follower of Christ, how do I understand this problem? I want us to, there's a little website I found called Rethink Homelessness. Let's go ahead and play the first video there, Rick.
I've never seen a diamond in the flesh. I cut my teeth on wedding rings in the movies, and I'm not proud of my address. In the torn up town, no postcode envy, but every song's like gold teeth, Grey Goose, tripping in the bathroom, bloodstains, ball gowns, trash in the hotel room. We don't care. We're driving Cadillacs in our dreams, but everybody's like crystal, Maybach, diamonds on your timepiece, jet planes, islands, tigers on a gold leash. We don't care. We aren't caught up in your love affair, and we'll never be royal. It's a run in our blood, the kind of luck's the same for us. We crave a different kind of bud. Let me be your ruler. You can call me King B, and baby I'll rule. Let me live that fantasy.
As a follower of Christ, how do I personalize this problem, and how do I think about, or how do I rethink about homelessness? If you noticed the title of the sermon this morning, it says, If You Have a Toothache. Now, I'm not sure if that was a great title or not, because it was a little bit oblique, but here was the point. I read actually an article, and the fellow who was homeless said, I changed it to have in order to so you wouldn't correct my grammar later, but he said, if you got a toothache, it's 100 times worse on the streets. It stops everything. I think we tend to think so often, and maybe, who knows why, just being human, in either or categories. And I want to suggest to us this morning that sometimes we think that having compassion, and thinking that people need to be responsible for their own lives are mutually exclusive. And I want to suggest to you, your story says otherwise. Your story, while it is important for us to be responsible for our own lives, none of us have made it on our own. We all stand in need of compassion. Of course, we don't want to have compassion that is no longer compassionate, that's enabling, but I wonder if that really is our fear, if that really is a true fear. So I want to suggest having compassion and believing it is best for the homeless and the impoverished people to control their own lives are not mutually exclusive needs. And so we have to challenge some of the things that go through our minds, something like this. Simplistic labels like they just need to get a job. You telling me that you cannot get a job in this city? Right now there are job openings. Well, I'm not sure I know the whole distance between the homelessness and the job openings, but I think what my suggestion is that we better be not quite so quick to pass that judgment. They're all drunks or drug users. You know what? That is not true. Now, the statistics say there is a problem. It may be 50 or 60% that do have an alcohol or drug problem, and it's not always obvious if it was prior to their homelessness or was on account of it. So yes, half do, but half don't. If they wanted off the streets, they would be. It really isn't much of a problem in our area. There are more services or beds than people on the streets. People just want to milk the system. I'm trying to make some statements that might run through our minds that maybe need a bit of challenge this morning. What I'd like us to do is humanize. It's the opposite of dehumanize. It is to recognize that people are made in the image of God, everyone. What if the guy in the street is actually Jesus in the street? If we take Matthew 25 fairly literally, how can we think about this? Go ahead and play the next video.
I can fake a smile. I can force a laugh. I can dance and play the part if that's what you ask. Give you all I am. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. But I'm only human, and I bleed when I fall down. I'm only human, and I crash and I break down. Your words in my head, knives in my heart. You build me up and then I fall apart. 'Cause I'm only human, just a little human.
Just a few applications. The first step, I believe, is noticing. Pray to care and not turn away with indifference or judge with disdain. I think in our own protection, in our own inadequacy, and not quite knowing what to do, we find ourselves judging or looking at with disdain. Look them in the eye. Ask them their name. Ask them about that Cardinals game. You say, well, that's a funny topic. No. It treats them as a person, like you would anyone else. It's a conversation. Humanize. Remember that they have a story. Ask them what they need. One size does not fit all, as you can see from the slide. Now, most articles suggest that if you can give some money, and I know we're asked, there's a lot of panhandlers out there, and that kind of, the panhandling, I think, kind of interprets our view of the homeless to a great degree. And most suggest not giving money. And a lot of that is because of the 50 to 60% that are addicted, that it's not going to actually be helpful for them. On the other hand, there are 40% or so it's a bit, almost a half and half, that could be helped by it. I'm not going to make a recommendation for that necessarily, but because in most cases, money without engagement will fail to address the longer-term cycle of poverty, and it may or may not help even in the short term. Now, the next thing I want to say is this church, wonderful work through Room at the Inn. We have a ministry. For almost 25 years, the Room at the Inn ministry. Maybe it has been 25 years. Colin's not here this morning. Ben, where are you? You here? Ben Maringer? Can't get either one of my room at the inn guys. They're probably out with the folks today. I don't know. Safe, clean, immediate housing, provide meals, provide case management, help with the clients, help identify their causes of their homelessness, have physical and mental health evaluations done, help those with substance abuse, their evaluation and counseling, help with domestic abuse counseling, provides life skills classes including financial management and parenting and job skills. While staying at the room at the inn, children are able to continue to attend their own school, providing some continuity to their life. Transportation is provided by the room at the inn folks to and from school. It's a wonderful, wonderful ministry and story. We have the privilege of being a part of that on the first Friday night of every month. And at the very least, as a starting point, not only in terms of providing the meal and providing the transportation and being with the families that are here, but be a part of this and work on this, will you, with me together? Humanize. Humanize. See families, mothers, children. They're truly in need. Many of them where this applies, where it's just they're going to get back on their feet. They're going to get back into some permanent housing, but they've hit a rough patch. Don't forget, it is in serving the homeless more often than not, and this is the mystery of sacred Scripture, that we see Jesus again. That he is brought to us through human need and particularly through the homeless. Because as someone said, when you have nothing, God becomes